Welcome to Business SOS Podcast. This is episode number 68 of Business SOS. This is brought to you by the Florida Small Business Legal Center. Last week, I began this series, Top 10 Legal Questions Every Business Owner Should Ask a Business Lawyer. And we went over a number of questions. We talked about the business structures. We talked about how to protect your personal assets from business liabilities. We also talked about whether or not you should have a partnership agreement. If you have a partnership, the answer is yes. We also discussed how to include, what to include in your business contracts with clients, and how to protect your intellectual property. We discussed trademarks, copyrights, patents, and trade secrets. And we also discussed what to do if you receive a lawsuit. So today, I'm going to basically finish that topic and talk about some of the items. I'm going to talk about, let me start with number 7. What are my legal obligations when hiring employees or independent contractors? Last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago, last week actually, or 2 weeks ago, I spoke about the new rule on Department of Labor rules on independent contractor, the classification. So, and it's very important. Many businesses, what they do is that they have employees, but they go ahead and pay them as independent contractors. And by doing so, they avoid paying payroll taxes, and they might be in violation of federal law. And sometimes they do that because employees ask them, well, I want to go ahead and, don't withhold my taxes, pay me as a 1099, and I'm okay with that. And the employee cannot waive those provisions. It's now to the employee to decide how he or she is going to get paid if they're an employee. They're going to get paid pursuant to the law. So I want to make that point very clear right from the very beginning. So tip number 1, if in terms of your obligations, you got to pay in compliance to federal law. Department of Labor, Fair Labor Standards Act, you got to pay in compliance. You have to withhold and pay payroll taxes. My recommendation is to use a payroll company to do that. If you're doing payroll by yourself, as a business owner, you're taking just too much time. There are payroll services that do that very efficiently for very minimal amount of money, and they do it, flawlessly in most cases. That they're able to withhold the taxes for you. They're able to pay the state of Florida for the unemployment compensation. The payroll taxes in the state of Florida. They pay the IRS as well on the 941 forms. They handle everything for you for, in some cases, less than $100 a payroll. It's just worth it, and that frees up a lot of your time to run your business as opposed to dealing with payroll headaches. I also recommend to have a separate payroll account. So everything that deals with payroll should go into one separate business account that is not, don't pay any other expenses other than payroll. It makes it cleaner, it makes it simpler. And if you ever, get audited in terms of say, okay, what are you paying for payroll taxes or withholdings? You have that account there. You get your reports from the payroll company. It's just flawless. It'll be seamless, and it'll free up some time. So I recommend hiring a payroll company as well. Pay your overtime. That's very important. If the employees are working over 40 hours a week, pay the overtime. If they're working for you over 40 hours a week, they're making you money. It's productive. So don't withhold the overtime. Pay them. I recommend having a contract with employees and also with independent contractors. And there's different types of contracts with employees and independent contractors, and that's the subject for, I went over that in some other podcast. But it's important to have clarity about their obligations as employees, your obligations as well as an employer, and also with independent contractors as well, having that clearly outlined. I recommend having workers' comp insurance in Florida. If you have over 4 employees, you're required to have workers' comp insurance. So I do recommend talking to a insurance broker and finding out what is the cost of workers' comp insurance. It is worth it. Even if you have less than 4 employees, God forbid something happens, you don't want to be liable for any injuries or any type of medical bills for the employee if they got injured on the job. And there's also some additional protections to the employer by having workers' comp insurance in reference to immunity from potential liability for any type of injury to the employees by having the workers' comp insurance. So I recommend you have that. I want to make it clear that there's no such thing as a 1099 employee. I get that term very often by various, by clients and business owners that I speak with. Well, I just pay their 1099 employees. Either they're employees that you pay through, that they report their earnings through a W-2, or they're 1099 independent contractors, which they receive a 1099 and you report that to the IRS. It's one or the other. They're not both. Number 8, how can I protect myself from being sued? I get that question very often. And the answer to that, you can't. You're dealing with human beings, and a lot of things happen. So there's, unless you're not in business, you cannot, protect yourself from ever being sued. Every transaction carries some risk about going wrong. Minimal risk in some cases, but, some things happen. So, but what you can do is reduce the possibility of being sued. You can develop strategies to mitigate the exposure. And that's what we can do. And that's what we can help you with, but also there's other measures that you can take to prevent that from happening. And, obviously for those of us who do this for a living, we see lawsuits every day. We defend lawsuits every day, so it is something that we see. A business owner should not be sued all the time. If you're being sued all the time, you're getting a lot of lawsuits, there's something wrong with your systems or processes that is lending itself to having that exposure. So a good policy, a good business policy to have is have a well-written contract. If you're in a service business, have a written contract. And if there are changes to the contract, have amendments. When you have clarity between you and your customer about what your expectations are, it reduces the possibility, reduces the probability, if you will, of having a lawsuit filed against you. Or you suing the client. So that clarity is very important to have, and a written contract will help you reduce that exposure. Good business practices goes without saying. Having a policies and procedures in place that are consistent. Obviously, you don't have to publish that to your customers, but having internal policies and procedures in place that your employees follow that are good business practices, and that will reduce your exposure as well. Proper insurance is also something that you can do. And I mentioned some of them before. You have your general liability policy, and also your workers' comp policy. You have your professional liability policy. So a business insurance broker can, assist you in providing you the coverage that you need. If you have a lease agreement, and we're going to talk about that shortly, it is very likely, in fact, I'm willing to bet that it is embedded in most lease agreements, that the ones that I've seen, that you're required to carry a certain amount of general liability policy and name the landlord as an additional insured. So you have a lease, very likely you'll have to get insurance anyway. So, but that's another way that you can protect yourself from the likelihood of being sued, is also having insurance, because if you get sued, then the insurance company should take the defense and protect you. So it's about reducing the exposure. Another item that you could have is liability waivers. That's, depending on the type of business you're in, is basically having a waiver for liability with respect to some injuries. And I'll give you an example of that. I mean, if you have seen some of my earlier episodes, I practiced martial arts. At least I used to practice before my hip surgeries. I want to go back. So practiced Taekwondo, Judo, Jiu-Jitsu. And the last, pretty much in every single school that I attended, we were all required to sign liability waivers. we were practicing high risk type of sport that injuries can happen, and I've suffered some of those. But if I suffered an injury because one of my teammates accidentally basically injured me, I cannot sue the school owner because I got injured, because I signed a liability waiver. Another example is when I used to compete in judo and jiu-jitsu as well, as part of the registration packet to register for the tournament and be able to allow to compete, you have to sign those liability waivers. And they were very detailed liability waivers. Said you can be disfigured, you can have permanent injury, you can even die. Okay? So, and the reason for that is that you're engaging in a high risk type of sport as far as people perceive it, that could lend itself to potential injury. And they don't want the organizers to be liable for you being injured by choosing to be part of that tournament. And nobody's obligating you to go. You do it because it's your hobby, you have goals you want to pursue, it's your passion. But a liability waiver is a way that they protected themselves from a potential lawsuit as a result of an injury happening at a tournament while you're competing. So I just give you that as an example of why that is also a way that you can protect yourself. It will not prevent the lawsuit per se, because there are ways to get around them, and that's a different conversation to that. But it can be raised as a defense that, hey, if you broke your ankle while you were competing and you're suing us because the other opponent, did a technique that you got injured, you signed a liability waiver. You assume the risk. You assume the risk to going into that tournament and voluntarily competing. You paid the registration fee, and it's your responsibility to protect yourself. So it's just an example of that, how that liability waiver can work. Number 9, how do I transfer my business to my children? That's a very important question. It goes into the topic of succession planning. And some businesses, can be transferred to children, depending on the licensing or whether the business owner is interested in doing that. So one of the things that, you can do, there are buy-sell agreements that are involved. The first thing I recommend to you do is to hire an attorney who specializes in developing succession plans for business. Don't do that by yourself. And I'll give you some tips. And in fact, I'm going to bring an attorney that specializes in that as a guest in the future, near future. Got to reach out to him to schedule him so we can talk about succession planning. What are the strategies you can take in doing so? But as a nutshell, one of the things that I recommend, obviously, is looking and how that business is going to be transferred and when. There are buy-sell agreements, there are trusts that are established as well that the business can be part of, and also a succession plan in terms of the training. Passing the business to somebody else, especially the children, how they're going to run the business, what type of experience, how long when are they going to be ready to do that? So that's part of the succession planning process. But my recommendation in that is get an attorney that specializes in succession planning, so that way it is done correctly as well. Number 10, what should I look for in a commercial lease? That is an episode in and of itself. And I think in my earlier episodes, I talked about lease agreements, and I think I did a second episode a few months after that, or maybe a year later. And I might revisit it at some point in the future and go into a deep dive into lease agreements. Pretty much most small businesses will have some type of lease. Whether you work at an executive suite office, whether you work at a retail location with a storefront, unless you own the building, you will have a lease. So in terms of one of the major expenditures you will have, it's going to be a lease agreement, and it's going to be your payroll. And many people do not place the importance that a lease agreement deserves. And when they ask me, okay, how much it will cost me to review the lease, and I'll tell them the amount, they say, well, that's too much money. And the reality is not. When you look at whatever the amount I quote, I'm not going to talk about it here specifically because every lease is different. But the reality is that when you have a lease agreement, you're committing to 3 or 5 years or more. And when you multiply the amount, say it's a $3,000 a month, lease times 12, times number of years, okay, that's a big commitment. So you have to, and plus it will include a personal guarantee. So one of the things that I recommend if you have a lease agreement is have an attorney review it. It's very important. Understand the terms. You have to understand that lease. The attorney will review it for you, but ultimately you're responsible for that lease. And if I talk about a mistake that many business owners make is that they don't read their own contracts. They just have somebody read it for them. Or they do not read them and sign them. So read your own contracts, understand them. You have questions, ask the questions. But ultimately, you're going to live with that contract. So, but have an attorney review it and help you understand its terms. Okay? How long in the year, understand how many years will the lease be, 3 to 5 years, etc. If you're starting as a startup, do not recommend a long lease for obvious reasons. It's greater risk. Understand the renewal terms, understanding your obligations, your rent obligations, your basic rent, whether it's a triple net lease, whether you're responsible for taxes, insurance, and maintenance fees. What are your insurance requirements? When are the rent increases and for how much? Understand that. Are you responsible for repairs? You will be responsible for some repairs. Understand what repairs you're responsible for. In fact, many people overlook the fact that in many leases, they make you responsible for the HVAC system, the air conditioning system. That's very, very expensive to repair. So what I recommend my clients is to, before you go into that lease, inspect the HVAC through get somebody, pay them $200 to do the inspection. Sometimes they do it for free. Find out how old that unit is before you go into that lease and whether or not it has to be replaced throughout the course of the lease. Because if it does, tell the landlord, you will replace that. I'm not going to pay for your new AC because I just came in here. Dispute resolution and default procedures. We talked about that, dispute resolution in the prior episode. And Stan, I will tell you with leases, there's not much dispute resolution. You waive jury trial for the most part. It'll be a waiver jury trial. And the leases are not made for the tenant's benefit or for the landlord's benefit. And I want to give you a bonus question as well. I'd like to open a business, and what business licenses do I need to start? I get that very, very common, question, very often. If you're a startup, my recommendation is to get a mentor or a business coach. Running a business is high risk. Many people go in there not knowing what they're doing. And I'm going to refer to you to a place called SCORE. It's an Association of Retired Executives. It's free business mentorship. It's SCORE, SCORE.org. I refer many people to that, and that will give you, if you want free business mentorship, I recommend to do that. Consult with a business lawyer and accountant. You will need a business tax receipt from the city and an accounting tax receipt from your county. Check out the Florida Department of Revenue. Health and food licenses if you're in a type of business that provides food services. Professional licenses. And of course, last but not least, write a business plan. So this is up for today. It's a shorter episode. I appreciate you listening to me. If you have a question you'd like to answer, you can email me at rich@richsierra.com. My website is florida.smallbusinesslegalcenter.com. We're at Facebook at FSB Legal. We're YouTube at youtube.com/@RichardSierra. You can call us at 866-842-5202. Remember that Business SOS, 8 common legal mistakes business owners make and how to avoid them. It's available on Apple. It's available on Apple Podcast. Apologize. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and you can ask for any local bookstore. Let me do that again. Business SOS. Common legal mistakes business owners make and how to avoid them. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. You can ask for your local bookstores. If you like the podcast, please give us a review. And you can also follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy your shows. Until next week, this is Rich Sierra. Remember that my goal is to help you succeed.